For 12 years, my life had been a relentless pursuit of truth. As an investigative journalist, I thrived on exposing corruption, giving voice to the voiceless. My current project, a sprawling corporate fraud involving powerful figures, was my most ambitious yet. I was close, so close to cracking it wide open. My colleague Mark was my constant shadow, my trusted confidant. We were more than partners, we were brothers, bound by a shared belief in justice and the sanctity of our profession. He was the one person I implicitly trusted with everything. The first subtle shifts began weeks before the public storm. A key source, once eager to talk, suddenly vanished, their line going dead. Digital breadcrumbs I had carefully laid out seemed to have been swept away, leaving no trace. Files I knew were locked down appeared to have been accessed, then subtly altered. My gut screamed something was wrong. A deep unease I couldn't quite pinpoint. I tried to shake it off, dismissing it as the usual paranoia that comes with digging too deep. We were on the precipice of something massive. The pressure was immense. The morning the news broke, it wasn't my expose that hit the headlines, it was me. Investigative journalist Julian Vance implicated in massive corruption scandal. The words screamed from every digital banner, every news channel. My name plastered across screens, linked to the very crimes I spent my life fighting. The sheer audacity of it, the twisted irony, left me breathless. It was a public assassination of my character, a meticulously crafted lie designed to destroy everything I stood for. The world I knew began to tilt violently on its axis. The police arrived with chilling precision, their faces grim, their movements swift. They had warrants, meticulously detailed accusations, and what they claimed was irrefutable evidence. My mind reeled, racing through every contact, every file, searching for the crack in their story, but there was none. The handcuffs felt like ice clicking shut around my wrists. This wasn't a mistake, not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, deliberate setup designed to ensnare me completely. As they led me out, I felt the cold dread of an elaborate trap closing around me. The public shaming was brutal, relentless. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved into my face, and reporters shouted questions I couldn't answer. My name, once synonymous with integrity and truth, was now dragged through the mud, smeared with accusations of greed and deceit. Social media erupted, a furious mob baying for my downfall. The people I had fought for, whose stories I had told, now saw me as the very villain I had always pursued. The weight of their condemnation, the betrayal in their eyes, was a crushing blow, far worse than any physical pain. My editor's voice on the phone was strained, apologetic, but firm. "Julian, we have no choice. The evidence is overwhelming. We're suspending your access, effective immediately. Your name will be removed from all active investigations." Each clipped word was a nail in the coffin of my career. Doors that had always been open slammed shut. My professional identity, forged over a decade of tireless work, dissolved in an instant. I was blacklisted, exiled from the only world I had ever truly known. The silence that followed the call was deafening, the void terrifying. Confined to a temporary holding cell, the chaos of the outside world receded, replaced by a chilling silence. My mind, usually sharp and analytical, felt fractured, but slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece things together. Mark. He was the only one who knew the full extent of my investigation, the hidden paths to my sources, the intricate details of my research. He had access to my files, my contacts, my deepest confidences. A cold, insidious thought began to take root, a betrayal so profound I almost couldn't bear to acknowledge it. It couldn't be him, not Mark. A television in the common area flickered to life, showing a live press conference. My heart pounded. There he was, Mark, standing confidently at the podium, surrounded by flashing lights and eager reporters. He spoke with a calm, assured voice, outlining new initiatives, promising renewed integrity for the newsroom. He was in my chair, literally and figuratively. He had stepped seamlessly into the void left by my sudden public disgrace. The picture clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He wasn't just there, he had ascended. My stomach churned. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Mark, my brother in arms. The man I had shared countless late nights with, poring over documents, risking our lives in dangerous neighborhoods, dreaming of the impact we would make. He had not only stood by while I was destroyed, he had orchestrated it. Every carefully planted lie, every manipulated piece of evidence, every whisper against my name, it all led back to him. The profound betrayal, the desecration of our shared trust, was a gut-wrenching pain, a wound deeper than any accusation. The initial shock gave way to a cold, precise anger. It wasn't the fiery, uncontrolled rage that consumes, it was a quiet, strategic fury. They thought they had broken me, stripped me of my identity, left me with nothing. They had underestimated the resilience of a man who had built his life on fighting for truth. This wasn't the end of Julian Vance. This was the beginning of a different kind of investigation, a different kind of story. Mark and everyone involved would face a reckoning. My meticulous plan for justice, for vengeance, began to take shape in the silence of my mind. My lawyer, a tired man named Mr. Henderson, laid out the charges. Embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice. Each word felt like a physical blow. The system was already against me, a machine grinding forward. I knew then that this was not a fair fight, it was an execution. They showed me the evidence. Forged emails, doctored bank statements, anonymous tips. It was all so neat, so perfectly crafted. The details were specific to my work, my contacts. Only Mark could have known these things, could have twisted them so effectively. A cold certainty settled in my gut. I needed to talk to someone, anyone I could trust. Alina, a source I had worked with for years, was my first call. She had always believed in me, in the truth. I dialed her number, my hand shaking slightly. This was my last thread to the outside world, to sanity. Her voice was cold, distant. "Julian, I can't. The risks are too high. They've shown me things. I believe them." The line went dead. My heart sank. Mark had not just framed me, he had poisoned my entire network, turning my allies into skeptics or worse, enemies. He had thought of everything. I tried Michael next, a colleague from a rival paper. We had shared leads, traded favors. He picked up, but his tone was wary. "Julian," I heard, "look, I can't get involved. My editor, it's too hot." Another door slammed shut. The isolation was suffocating. Every news cycle brought more of Mark. He was the new face of integrity, giving interviews about restoring trust and cleaning house. He never mentioned my name directly, but his words were sharp, calculated daggers. He was painting me as the corrupt one, the lone wolf who had betrayed our mission. The public bought it. The days blurred into a haze of legal jargon and crushing silence. My apartment felt like a tomb. I ate little, slept less. Despair was a heavy cloak suffocating me. The career I had built, the identity I had forged, it was all gone. I was a ghost in my own life, stripped bare. I thought justice was clear, truth absolute. I had believed in the system, in the power of good journalism. Now I saw it all as a flimsy facade, easily manipulated by ruthless ambition. My faith in everything I held sacred crumbled. The world was a darker, more cynical place than I had ever imagined. But even in the deepest despair, a tiny ember flickered. It was the memory of my family's name, the sacrifices I had made, the truths I had uncovered. I couldn't let him win. I wouldn't. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about reclaiming the truth, about proving what he had done. The despair gave way to a cold, clear resolve. Mark thought he had destroyed me. He was wrong. He had only given me a new purpose. I would start small, re-examining every detail of his betrayal, every piece of evidence. This was my new investigation, and it would be the most important one of my life. He would pay. My apartment was now my war room. The silence was heavy, but it was a silence I welcomed. It allowed me to think, to plan. Mark had stripped me of everything, but he had also given me a singular focus. My new investigation began here, in the quiet, in the dark. I felt the weight of isolation, but also a fierce, cold determination. I started with the evidence they had used against me, the forged emails, the doctored bank statements. I knew my own digital footprint. I knew my habits. I looked for the smallest flaw, the tiniest ripple in Mark's perfect fabrications. My eyes scanned lines of code, timestamps, and metadata. I was searching for a ghost. It was subtle, almost invisible to an untrained eye, a timestamp on an email that was off by mere seconds, a metadata string that hinted at a different server than the one I used. It was a digital fingerprint, a tiny crack in Mark's elaborate scheme. This was the thread. This was where I would begin to pull. Mark knew my systems, my routines. He knew how I worked, where I stored my most sensitive files. This wasn't random. It was precise, calculated. He had used our shared knowledge, our trust, as a weapon. The betrayal was deeper than I had first imagined. He had planned this for a long time. The thought chilled me. I needed more. Digital anomalies were not enough for public reckoning. I needed to access secure information, old databases, things that wouldn't be in Mark's immediate reach. My mind went to the forgotten names, the contacts from years ago outside the main corporate circles, the ones who valued truth above all else. Then I remembered Frank, a retired IT specialist from a decade-old case, quiet, meticulous, and fiercely ethical. I had helped him once, cleared his name in a small local scandal. He owed me nothing, but his moral compass was true. He was my long shot, my last resort for accessing the deeper layers of system data. I used a burner phone, one I had kept for emergencies. I dialed Frank's old, unlisted number. My heart pounded. This was a risk, a big one. I kept my voice calm, concise. I explained the situation, leaving out no detail. I laid out the truth as I knew it to the one man who might listen. Frank listened, silent. Then after a long pause, he spoke. "Julian, this is dangerous." His voice was low, grave, but he agreed. He gave me an old encrypted data stick. It held access codes, backdoors to forgotten archives. He told me where to look. A hidden server log that Mark might have overlooked. It was a lifeline. I plugged in the stick. The data flowed. It was all there. A meticulous record of Mark's digital movements, his unauthorized access, the precise moments he altered files and planted false evidence. His name linked to every fraudulent action. The sheer scale of his premeditation was sickening. He hadn't just framed me, he had built a fortress of lies. I worked through the night, compiling, organizing. The truth was emerging, stark and undeniable. But as dawn approached, a strange feeling washed over me. A flicker of lights outside, a car parked too long down the street. It was a subtle sign, a cold prickle on my skin. Mark knew I was digging. My investigation had just become far more dangerous. I pored over the data Frank gave me. Every altered file, every suspicious login, it was all there. Mark's digital fingerprints were everywhere. I cross-referenced timestamps, IP addresses, and file versions. The sheer volume of his deceit was staggering. He had been planning this for months, meticulously building his case against me piece by piece. My initial anger solidified into a cold, precise determination. This was no longer just about clearing my name, it was about exposing a predator. The digital trail led me to financial records, dummy corporations, shell accounts, transactions disguised as legitimate expenses. These were the same methods I had been investigating in the corruption scandal. Mark had not just framed me, he had mirrored my own investigation, using its very structure against me. He knew my sources, my methods. He weaponized my work. It was a sick, twisted parody of my life's purpose. The depth of his planning was chilling. I compiled everything into a secure, encrypted drive. Forged emails, doctored reports, manipulated testimonies, and now the undeniable financial trails. Each piece fit perfectly, forming an irrefutable case against Mark. It was a masterpiece of deception, but I had found the cracks. This evidence was not just for my defense, it was for his prosecution. It was a weapon forged in the fires of my ruin, ready to be deployed. The first phase was complete. With the evidence secured, I shifted focus. Who was Mark truly? I started digging into his past, searching for any early signs, any cracks in the facade I had known. Old university records, early career moves, even social media posts from years ago. I looked for patterns, for anything that hinted at the ambition and ruthlessness I now saw. It was like sifting through sand looking for a particular grain. I found it. A pattern of subtle sabotage, of stepping over others to get ahead, disguised as professional ambition. A former colleague from a past job, someone Mark had worked with, spoke of Mark's intense jealousy over minor successes, his quiet resentment. He always wanted to be the best, the one in charge, no matter the cost. It wasn't just about my position, it was about his insatiable need for power. The truth was a cold, bitter pill. Mark wasn't just a betrayer, he was a carefully constructed lie. The brotherhood we shared, the trust, the late-night talks, it was all a performance, a means to an end. He had used my loyalty, my openness as tools for his ascent. He had seen my success not as a shared victory, but as an obstacle to be removed. My brother was a stranger, a predator cloaked in familiarity. The desire for vindication, for simply clearing my name, faded. It was too small a goal for the magnitude of his crime. He hadn't just ruined my career, he had desecrated my life, my identity, my very belief in human decency. Justice alone felt insufficient. He needed to pay a price that reflected the totality of his betrayal. My new purpose was not to merely survive, but to ensure his complete and spectacular downfall. This wasn't about anger anymore, it was about strategy. Every move had to be precise, every detail accounted for. I would not leave anything to chance. He had built his empire on lies, and I would dismantle it brick by brick. My revenge would be public, undeniable, and utterly devastating. It would be a story that no journalist, not even Mark, could bury. Mark's new position, while powerful, had its own weaknesses. He was now a public figure subject to scrutiny. His ascent had been too fast, too perfect. There would be questions, especially from those he had stepped over to get there. I focused on the corporate structure, the investors, the board members, who would have the most to lose if his foundation crumbled. These were the levers. I found them, the senior executives he had bypassed, the old guard he had pushed aside, the investors who believed his carefully crafted lies. They were the key. They valued reputation and stability above all else. If I could expose his true nature, his foundation would crack. The next move would be crucial, finding the right moment, the right person to deliver the first undeniable blow. The game was about to begin. My first move was quiet. I targeted the new junior analyst Mark had hired, a young woman eager to prove herself. A tiny, anonymous tip, a question about a seemingly minor discrepancy in an old project budget. It was just enough to make her look closer, to start asking questions. The tip was a small data packet, a fragment of an old internal audit report I'd found in the deep archives Frank helped me access. It pointed to an inconsistency in a report Mark had signed off on years ago. Nothing major, but a loose thread in his carefully woven tapestry. Days later, I saw the ripple. The junior analyst, Sarah, was spending extra hours, her brow furrowed. I watched her from afar in the cafeteria. She was digging just as I knew she would. Mark was oblivious, still basking in his new spotlight. The small questions from Sarah reached Mark. I heard whispers. He dismissed them as newbie overeagerness, but his dismissive tone was too loud, too forced. I saw him glance around the office more often, a flicker of unease in his eyes. The seed was growing. It was time to apply more pressure. I needed to hit him where it hurt most, his public image. I turned my attention to a prominent industry blog run by a former colleague of ours, someone Mark had slighted years ago. A subtle opening was all I needed. I crafted an anonymous message to the blogger, hinting at a pattern of convenient coincidences in Mark's past promotions. I provided a breadcrumb, a link to a barely public internal memo that hinted at a conflict of interest in his last major project. It was untraceable but potent. The blog post went live. It was subtle, raising questions without direct accusations, but it was enough. Mark's confident stride faltered. He snapped at a subordinate in the hallway, something I hadn't seen him do before. He was losing control bit by bit. My plan was working. Mark was reacting, which meant he was distracted. His paranoia was a weapon I now wielded. The next phase required a direct public challenge, something that would force his hand. I needed to choose the right arena. The annual industry conference was weeks away. Mark was scheduled to give the keynote address, his moment of triumph. It was the perfect stage. I began preparing a dossier not just of his crimes, but of the specific ways he had manipulated the system. It would be delivered at the peak of his speech. The tension was a palpable thing, a hum in the air. Mark unknowingly was walking into a trap of his own making. He would stand before the industry, basking in false glory. And then the truth would be unleashed. His fall would be as spectacular as his rise, and I would be there to watch. The industry conference hummed with anticipation. Mark stood on stage, bathed in the spotlight, ready for his keynote. He exuded confidence, the same false confidence I had once mistaken for genuine leadership. This was his moment, the peak of his stolen glory. I was a ghost in the crowd, watching, waiting. Every detail of my plan was set. As Mark began to speak, his voice booming with manufactured authority, I made my move. A subtle signal to my contact. A trusted journalist who had seen through Mark's lies even before I did. A slim, encrypted data stick disguised as a common USB was discreetly placed on the table next to a prominent reporter I knew to be fiercely ethical. It held everything. Moments later, a low murmur rippled through the audience. Phones lit up, screens flashed with breaking news alerts. The reporter, a professional, had wasted no time. My compiled dossier, meticulously detailing Mark's intricate web of lies, his financial manipulations, and the precise timeline of my framing was now public. The truth, raw and undeniable, was unleashed. Mark's voice faltered mid-sentence. His eyes, once arrogant, darted around the room, wide with panic. The murmurs grew into shouts, questions, and then outrage. The facade he had so carefully constructed shattered, exposing the fear beneath. The applause he expected turned into a cacophony of condemnation. His entire world was crumbling live on stage. The conference hall erupted into chaos. Reporters, initially focused on Mark's speech, swarmed him, their questions sharp, accusatory. The media frenzy was immediate, intense. Every major news outlet picked up the story, dissecting the evidence, exposing his deceit. His carefully curated image, built on my ruin, evaporated in an instant. Mark's panicked attempts to control the narrative were futile. He issued denials, tried to discredit the sources, even suggested I was behind a smear campaign. But the evidence was too robust, too meticulously laid out. Each frantic move he made only served to highlight his guilt, digging his hole deeper. He was cornered, desperate. His board members, once loyal, turned their backs. Investors, seeing their reputations and fortunes at risk, began to distance themselves. The very people who had benefited from his ascent now saw him as a liability, a threat to their own standing. The corporate world, which he had so ruthlessly exploited, was now turning against him. I watched from a quiet distance as the walls closed in on Mark. News vans camped outside his office, cameras flashed, and his name, once celebrated, was now synonymous with disgrace. The justice I had meticulously planned was unfolding, public, and undeniable. It was a grim satisfaction, a cold triumph in the face of so much pain. Even as his world crumbled, the bitter taste of betrayal lingered. The image of Mark, my trusted brother, was still seared into my mind. The years of shared purpose, the bond we once had, felt like a phantom limb, an ache that no amount of vindication could fully heal. Justice was served, but the wound remained. Mark's professional ruin was complete, but his personal reckoning had just begun. The legal system, slow but relentless, was now turning its gaze on him. He would face not just public shame, but criminal charges for the corruption he orchestrated. My mission was almost complete, but the path ahead for both of us remained uncertain. The news of Mark's arrest spread quickly. He was charged with fraud, obstruction of justice, and a host of other crimes. The evidence I had compiled was airtight. His carefully constructed life began to unravel, piece by piece, just as mine had. The system, slow but relentless, was finally turning on him. I felt a cold sense of justice, not triumph, watching his public fall. It was a necessary step, but it brought no joy. Then came the official statements. My name was cleared. The same news channels that had condemned me now reported on the truth, on Mark's elaborate scheme. It was surreal to see my reputation slowly pieced back together in the public eye. The public reaction was mixed, some apologies, some lingering doubt, but the legal vindication was undeniable. It was a quiet victory, a turning point I had fought for. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, called me. His voice was lighter than I had ever heard it. Julian, it's done. All charges dropped. Your record is clear. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything I had lost and fought to reclaim. I thanked him, a quiet gratitude in my voice. The legal battle was over. The physical weight of the accusations lifted, but other burdens remained. I sat by the lake watching the water. The victory felt hollow in some ways. Justice was served, yes, but the profound trust I had lost, the brotherhood I had believed in, could never be fully recovered. That wound, deep and insidious, would always be a part of me. The world was now a place where I looked for shadows, even in the brightest light. It was a bittersweet realization, a price I would always pay. I attended Mark's sentencing. He looked small, defeated, stripped of the false confidence he once wore. The judge handed down a harsh sentence, citing the premeditation and the betrayal of trust. Mark's ambition had led him to this. He had lost everything he gained at my expense and more. Watching him, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet confirmation that the cycle was complete. he had paid his price. Rebuilding my life and career began with small steps. An old editor, someone I had respected, reached out. He offered a freelance assignment, a chance to write again quietly without the spotlight. It was a humble beginning, but it was a start. My fingers ached to write, to chase truth again, not for revenge, but for the purpose that had always driven me. I embraced this new, slower pace. I was not the man I had been, the old Julian. The one who believed in absolute good and unwavering loyalty was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, forged in fire and truth, but also scarred. My identity was no longer solely tied to my career. I had faced the abyss and returned, carrying the weight of experience. This new identity, though harder one, felt more authentic. The scars remained, not visible ones, but deeper emotional marks. The phantom ache of betrayal was a constant reminder, a lesson in vigilance. I learned to trust my instincts more, to question everything, even the familiar. It was a heavy price for truth, but it also made me sharper, more resilient. These scars were now a part of my story, a testament to what I had overcome. I began to reconnect with a few trusted individuals, slowly, cautiously. Frank, the IT specialist, became a close confidant, a new kind of brother. Alina, the source who had initially turned away, reached out. Building a new network felt different, more deliberate. It was no longer about implicit trust, but about earned respect and shared purpose. I valued these connections more than ever. The path ahead was different but clear. My quest for justice was complete, my honor reclaimed. I found a quiet vindication in continuing my work, in pursuing truth for its own sake, not for glory or revenge. The world was still complex, but I was ready for it. I was Julian Vance, an investigative journalist, and my life's purpose, though forever changed, continued.